Welcome to the Really American Podcast. Welcome to the Really American Podcast. I'm Chip Franklin. Thank you so much for being here, and I appreciate you joining us at Really American on YouTube and checking out the many videos we have, especially today and this past couple of weeks. There's been some really big stuff going on. But what's been happening since Trump took office is very similar to a book I like to refer to a lot. It's called The Fifth Risk by Michael Lewis. You know him from The Big Short and Moneyball. It's a book that postulates this: what happens if the people running the government have no idea what they're doing? And the book was written before. This is the first Trump presidency. And it's really not so political as much as it is analytical about how does government work. And he has a new government. Who is government? He has a new book out, Who is Government? So we'll talk about that. This kind of lays into our first guest, and just this great guy, Max Brooks. If you're not familiar with him, he's an actor and an author. I know you know his last name because his father might be one of the funniest people in the world. Max is ironic, to say the least, in that he writes about a little bit, I think, of the same ideas that Lewis does, yet metaphorical in stories. World War Z, which you may have seen. If you haven't, you should, starring Brad Pitt, and definitely read the book. They're different, but they're similar in a lot of ways. It talks about this de-evolution, which is actually a title of another one of his books. Max Brooks is nice enough to join us here on the Really American Podcast to talk a little bit about his approach to writing and his experience in speaking to, really smart people about these really difficult issues. Good to see you, Max.
Good to see you, Chip. Thanks for having me on.
So right now, I think one of the things that this country has never experienced is kind of the same sort of plot line that one of these zombies movies have. Were you thinking of that when you put it together? Like, what happens when and the thing that always bothered me about zombie movies and Invasion of the Body Snatchers is these people look just like the people you used to trust, and now they're trying to hurt you.
Yeah. I think we're at a point that used to haunt me when I was a little kid, which is what happens when the grown-ups don't know what to do? Because I think when you're a child, you always look at the grown-ups and you think, oh, they must know what they're doing, right? They're the grown-ups. And I had a few experiences when I was a kid where the grown-ups didn't do what they were supposed to do. They were not grown up. They were fallible and human, and people died. And I've always carried that with me. And now we're at a point where, as you said, the people who are in charge don't know how anything works. And the scary part is they ran on that. And so they're actually doing what they were elected to do, which is blow everything up. But because we, as the voters, are not educated about the consequences, we're in for a real dark period.
It's interesting too, because I also think that there are speed bumps down this road to the trouble ahead, and those speed bumps work in our favor. I think that there's still a lot of people, and I'll even say that even the Stephen Millers of the world, that have a foot near the brake and that understand that we can't, again, watching NATO dissolve has repercussions that I think worry not just, Europe and Western Europe, but, all of us, because this is a very important alliance for democracy. But I part of me wonders is, like with, I'm not going to give away the ending to your book, the World War Z, but there many times, there are answers right in front of us, that aren't that complicated, but I don't know. I really don't know where we stand right now in all this. That's the hard part. I mean, are we near the end, or is this just the beginning?
No, we're near the beginning of this time of chaos. And, one of the things that we need to do, all of us, is we need to educate ourselves and our friends and neighbors, our fellow voters, about these institutions that the people we've elected to tear down are now starting to tear down. Because, in all fairness to these agents of chaos, many of us don't know why we've grown up with these institutions, right? That cramp our lives and that we have to pay for. And these institutions It's on them. It's on them to educate us why we have them. And a perfect example, like you just said, is NATO. I just got back from a trip to NATO headquarters, and they're in trouble, and they know it, because we've lived long enough, NATO has lived long enough, that now the people who founded it are no longer with us, and the reasons that NATO was put together are no longer front and center. So NATO has not told its story. NATO has not explained itself, and that has left a vacuum for misinformation, disinformation, the counter narrative, say, from Russia, that somehow NATO was this imperial octopus grabbing countries and gobbling them up and threatening it, and how it's a proxy for the US. I just got into a huge argument with an RFK guy who literally tried to say, like, well, you know, NATO is a proxy for America. America's using NATO to grab these countries to threaten Russia. He had no idea that getting into NATO is really, really hard. It's like studying for a bar mitzvah. You got to jump through a lot of hoops to prove your worth. It's not like we just tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, come on into NATO, number one. Also, number two, NATO is all about a unanimous vote. Everyone has to vote on it. So you have these blood enemies, say like Turkey and Greece, who have to always vote together, and they always have. So let's say a country wants to join NATO, and then they pass all these benchmarks. And it's not like America can say, well, you're in, no big deal. No, everybody has to vote on it. Denmark can veto it. You know, Italy can veto it, Portugal, anybody. So these are all these misconceptions that NATO has not explained for many years. Also, by the way, you can leave anytime you want. As I was talking to the former Supreme Allied Commander of our forces in Europe, he said it ain't the Hotel California. Any country can leave anytime they want, and no one ever has.
Yeah. There's a couple ironies there too, you know, that if in fact tactical nukes were ever used against NATO, the prevailing winds would blow them right back on Russia.
Okay, I'm so glad you brought this up, because I wanted to talk about this, and we haven't pre-met before this talk. Yeah, the nightmare scenario we are now facing is a tactical nuclear weapon, and that is because another institution has not been justified for years, which is just American alliances in general. You know, I grew up in the 80s, and I grew up on the left, and all my fellow liberals would always say the same thing. We're the world's policemen. It's wrong. We shouldn't be there. We shouldn't have all these alliances. We're just another empire. We're no different than the Soviet Union. What they didn't understand, what no one understands now, is that American foreign policy for decades has been to dissuade small countries from building atom bombs to protect themselves from their big country bullies. That's what we've been doing. We've been going around the world since 1945 and saying to these small countries, listen, come in, we'll be a partnership. We have enough conventional weapons, non-nuclear weapons, to protect you from the big guy right next to you who wants to gobble you up. So you don't have to build an atom bomb. If we take that away, if we just pull out and say you're all on your own, why wouldn't a small country build an atom bomb? And one other small technical point is it's really, really easy to build an A-bomb. It's hard to build a complex one with a big bang. It's hard to build one that you can deliver, say, in a missile or something like that. But I'm talking about the simple act of a crude fission weapon. This was actually one of the inaccuracies of the Oppenheimer movie, of all the Oppenheimer movies. There's been 3. They make you think like they're trying to make the atom bomb. They're trying to invent the atom bomb. They're not. What they were trying to do was invent a type of atom bomb with a much bigger bang. Like the one that they set off at Trinity is not the type we dropped on Hiroshima. The one we dropped on Hiroshima was a very crude, not even plutonium, uranium, with the same type we have in a civilian nuclear reactors. You can whip that one up nowadays with computer modeling in a couple weeks.
Yeah. David Ignatius wrote a book about Iran trying to create their nuclear weapon and how it was a novel, but how we worked to sabotage it, because it was apparently the centrifuge is very, very particular about the
Yeah.
balancing of it. Yeah.
Yeah. What I'll say, what Iran is trying to do is they're trying to build a plutonium bomb that is also small enough that they can deliver, say, on the warhead of a missile. And that's complicated, and that takes
Right.
a lot of time. But let's say the scenario, the one that keeps us up at night. We pull out of NATO. NATO dissolves, and say Lithuania is on its own. They can never stop the Russians. So they invest in a crude uranium. They can get uranium from civilian nuclear power plants. They couldn't put it in a missile, but they could put it in a storage container and bury it on their border. And then say to the Russians, don't come, we'll set it off. Putin then miscalculates, because that's what he does. Putin screws up and says they will never do it. They'll never set it off. He sends in the tanks, and the Lithuanians detonate their nuclear weapon on the border to stop the Russian army. Kill 100,000 Russian troops in the field. Putin then has to retaliate, because otherwise he'd be assassinated. So then he will essentially turn Vilnius into a giant mushroom cloud. We're not talking a little crude weapon. We're talking a thermonuclear ICBM. And the fallout, as you said, will go around the world, into our backyards, into our lungs, into our children.
Well, we're Cold War kids, so we dealt with this, for up until 89, and then it seemed like in the 90s that there was an option. A lot of people are talking about Biden today, but Biden was the one really pushing for Ukraine to become part of NATO in the 90s, and also the possibility of Russia. I think about the Marshall Plan and how successful it was, and how we screwed the pooch in both Vietnam, and we screwed the pooch mostly in Afghanistan when we didn't stay around and build some schools and roads that said "Made in America" on them, so they could get an understanding of who we were. Charlie Wilson's War covered that really well on film. I think, though, when we talk about nuclear weapons, I do find a little bit of comfort and where Pakistan and India backed off, and how they backed off, and where they are right now. But, we now know that Germany and France and the UK are all, looking at these possibilities. Even Finland and others that sit literally on the border. It's worrisome.
It's worrisome. And I think the really terrifying lesson of this Indo-Pakistani conflict, the one that should keep us all up at night, is that MAD, mutually assured destruction, works. And when I was a kid, we were told, no, we should get rid of the nukes. It's wrong. And then there were some, what we thought were right-wing hawks saying, no. The fact that we have nukes and the Soviets have nukes mean we will never have World War III with each other, because we can blow each other up. And India and Pakistan just proved that they both have nukes. Now, if one side didn't, right now, there'd be a massive bloodbath between India and Pakistan. And the message that is now sending to every country in the world is we need a mutually assured destruction. If we have a neighbor on our border that has nuclear weapons and we don't, we better ramp it up, and we better get ourselves a bomb.
The biggest mistake, I think, would be us thinking we could win a nuclear war, obviously. You remember Curtis LeMay, who was an Air Force general and also Wallace's running mate, I believe, at 72, what was?
Yeah, he wanted to use them in Vietnam.
Right. He wanted to use nuclear weapons in Vietnam. And I think now that, as we talk about this and, going back to the dystopian sort of landscape we live in, I guess, I wonder if Milley's counterparts and others in the military, who are the least hawkish group right now in that whole part of the Republican Party, ironically, I wonder if, plans are being made in case Trump does go off the rails. Any more than he is. Right now, it seems to me that there's these billionaire bras that all have this compact, and that's what they want. And that's what they want out of all this. I don't think it's power, it's money, which is in effect power. You think that's a big component of this?
Oh yeah, no, I think what we're seeing in the Trump universe is a civil war between sort of the racial ideologues, the Stephen Millers, the Steve Bannons, who are pretty much just like, we should pull up the drawbridge, we should go back to 1901 and just be a majority white Christian isolationist country. And on the other side, you've got the bros, the big business bros, who say, whoa, no, I'm making a lot of money with globalization. I'll rail against it publicly, but are you kidding? I'm not going to build a shoe factory in Dearborn, Michigan. Are you kidding? You don't have to pay these people? No. So yeah, I do think this is something actually Rob Reiner told me when I was a kid. He said, when you reach a certain level of wealth, politics becomes irrelevant, or political affiliation becomes irrelevant. It's just about keeping your wealth, and you'll go with whomever is going to let you keep your wealth. So yeah, I think that is a huge issue right now. This civil war between the hard right racial purity guys and the billionaires want to be trillionaires side.
All right, Max. So you should know this better than most. So I'll just throw this your way. Tiger Chairs, 50-page book, but inside it is a lot of questions, most unanswered because you're postulating. This is a literal war between the U.S. and China, and as I mentioned in the opening, there's warfare in the streets, guerrilla warfare in the streets of Los Angeles. Take a step back and tell us why you wrote that, and how does China fit into this this mix of everything from Middle Eastern oil to Russia, desperately trying to get back into the economic black area, and then of course us and China. Is this? I mean, there's an old word that I think in Chinese it's a Mandarin, I believe it's Joss, which just means basically good luck in business, and it's like the nicest thing you can say to somebody. Are there business interests paramount to the point that that's why they're not going to invade Taiwan, and that's why they would never do what you speculated in this book?
Well, I hope they wouldn't, but I think China knows that it's kind of reaching the end of the good old days. Like America in the late 19th, early 20th century was kind of where China is now, where sort of the British Empire ran the world and they did all the fighting and the dying. And all we had to do was just make money. And that was great. We had no global responsibilities. And we could just, as they once said, the business of America is business. And that's kind of been China for a while, where America has kind of kept global stability. Now they want to replace us, but they also understand that we have a very different model of what we think the world should look like. Since 1945, we've done this very weird experiment in democracy, in partnerships, and as a diehard liberal, I've grown to appreciate that. The fact that we actually have tried to build international bodies of consensus like the UN, like NATO. The fact that even when there were Soviet missiles in Cuba, we first went to the Organization of American States that we helped build, instead of just saying, no, we're just going to blow the crap out of Cuba. We have tried this. Now, China has a very different model, which is Tiananmen Square, which is we have a class of people that want to make money, and that's really what we care about. We just care about making money and growing our wealth. And if you get in the way for any reason, you will end up in a tiger chair. And a tiger chair, I should explain, is a Chinese torture device. It's kind of like the blank canvas. They strap you in and then they can do anything they want with you. You can sort of custom your tiger chair to however you want. But they have built a model at home on surveillance and big data, collating that surveillance, and torture and intimidation and murder on such a level that when they execute someone in the PRC, the family then gets a bill for the bullet. So that is their model. And they are looking to export that model to the rest of the world. They're hoping not to do it directly, maybe through proxy governments, propping people up, things like that. But that's what they're hoping for, is a world in which a small amount of people make a ton of money from everybody at the bottom. And if you get in their way, your family's going to get a bill for the bullet.
Is there a theocratic component to China?
No, I mean, their philosophy is money.
Okay.
That's money, and they're trying to use.
But there's 1.5 billion people. Obviously,
Yeah,
there's different. There's got to be a lot of different. I mean, look at India with just 1 billion, and with the factions inside India, from Christianity to Hindu to Muslim to whatever.
right.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder, like with China, and you mentioned Tiananmen Square. I think of that photo in the same way I think of that photo from Vietnam with a girl running through the streets with napalm,
Yeah.
and these iconic images. And I wonder now, though, with social media, even though they try to stop access to it there, that makes it even more alluring for the population. I'm wondering if these images and if these messages somehow, I mentioned speed bumps earlier, act in that way, and if they realize that.
Oh, they realize it, and that's why they understand that the golden age is coming to an end for them, because they really did build this new empire of theirs on cheap labor, on manufacturing. And they understand that, and the first generation of people who went to work in sweatshops had nothing, so they were fine working in sweatshops. It's kind of like in America when 100 years ago, those old black and white films of people who look like me coming in on the boat waving the America, hey, America, and they worked for nothing, but it's okay. They worked for pennies, but it was more pennies than they had back in Italy. But then the next generation comes up, and the next generation says, wait a minute, I want a labor union. I want a decent working wage. I want a safe work environment. And America had to adapt, and it was crazy and chaotic, and there were, riots and violence. China doesn't want that. They don't want this next generation of Chinese kids coming up saying, no, I'm not going to work for pennies building iPhones. I want a decent living wage, and I want health care, and I want safety. And they know that, and which is why they've been building a surveillance state. It's why they've been using metadata. It's why they built that. I think we talked about this last time I was on the show, the trust score.
Yeah.
Where they're watching everything you do, from your online activities to whether you drop a gum wrapper on the street from a camera. And that all gets collated into your national trust score. And depending on the trust score, can you get a bank loan? Can you travel abroad? All of that. So they're waiting for the day when the people get angry enough to push back.
It seems to me that one of the things that's protected this world for the longest time is inertia. It's hard to change course immediately. So when there's passions flaming, it's almost like an aircraft carrier at sea. Stopping it and turning it around takes a whole day, right? And I think about that when I think about what's going on with us now. That decision making doesn't seem to involve any kind of forethought or examination, and it's like, I'm just going to throw this and see if it sticks. And I mean, that seems to be what this is about right now. I look around the world and I think to myself, Putin and Xi and even Kim Jong-un and MBS and all of them, they must look at Trump and go, this guy's not really. I mean, this is to his credit in a way. We can't figure this guy out. I mean, and no, even the people close to him can't figure him out. And there's an advantage to that, but the disadvantage is huge. And how do you prepare for that if you're an American or an ally? I mean, what are they doing in NATO right now? Just trying to outlast this, hopefully, right? 3 years more.
Yeah, I mean, there's right now it's a time of absolute chaos with a man who is completely unhinged. And is an animal.
Sociopath, let's be honest.
Yeah,
he's a malignant narcissist with sociopathic tendencies. He's mentally ill.
Yeah, and I would even go even farther. I'd say it may not even just be sociopathic. It may also be psychopathic, in that when we saw him watching January 6th,
right,
and saw people actually getting hurt, that's the profile of someone like that, to watch pain and to receive pleasure by it. So I think he's completely unhinged in that way. And no one knows what to make of it. I think we've just saw the Qataris trying to at least play to the greed, at least trying to do the bribing, because we do know that greed is very big. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I think we see this with Netanyahu, where he thought, if I can just screw up Biden and Harris's chances of getting elected, then I will have Trump in office, and then I will have someone who lets me do whatever I want to do. And by the way, I say this as a Jew and a rabid Zionist. So I'm Zionist for life. You ain't going to get me to turn on Israel. But I ain't pro Netanyahu. and neither are a lot of Israelis.
Right.
And you see now that Netanyahu is saying, well, wait a minute, I thought we were friends. I thought we were, I thought we had an alliance. And Trump is like, I don't have an alliance with anybody.
Don't you think what happened in the past, this last trip there, was a real good understanding of who Trump really is when it revolves around Jews and Israel?
Yeah, I think that Trump, it says a lot about a lot, because it also explains, it goes back to what we talked about with nuclear weapons. The reason that Israel has had a nuclear deterrent for generations is because we have we have friendship with Israel, we've had alliances with Israel, but we don't have like a NATO pact with Israel. There's nothing legally binding us. If we choose to come to the raid, we can, but there's nothing. We have no Article 5 with Israel, and the Israelis know that. And once again, like with Trump, they're being reminded, oh, we're on our own, so we have a deterrent. And that's very scary if that model is then the rest of the world. What if the rest of the world, what if Poland, what if Sweden, what if every country in NATO says, oh, wow, one day we're just going to be left high and dry? So, no, we need some very big bombs to make some lasting peace.
All right, this is a real hard left turn, but I really think it's applicable with you, especially being here. When I write, I try to think in these four areas: honesty, brevity, irony, and levity. With the third, to me, being when I discovered irony as a young man and what it really meant, the unintended consequences of our actions, the exact opposite, essentially, of what you expected.
Yeah.
And I started to, and it came over me like a tidal wave. Yeah. And now I look at what we're doing and I want to tell these people, have you thought about what could happen with these actions? Just because everybody tells you it's a good idea. Let's look in the past. Let's look back. I mentioned the Marshall Plan earlier. I mean, when you defeat somebody, you have to offer them a hand. I mean, that's one of the problems in the Middle East is you have generational conflicts because of the deaths of brothers and sisters, and it moves forward and on and on and on. We've forgotten about October 7th, like it never happened.
Right.
I mean, nobody even talks about it. And what who these people are, whether at Hezbollah or Hamas, both of which, by the way, Qatar embraces and finances. You look at all this and you ask yourself, what's missing here? And I swear to God, I do believe it's a sense of irony. And I want to bring this to your dad. I think your father and people that kind of his generation that brought comedy to film, and then leading right up to Judd Apatow and the R-rated and the younger stuff. And I tell people, and this, comedy is hard, and it's hard because it's part of the psyche of who you are, is how you react to it. And that's why it's such a valuable tool against people like Trump, who with his mental illness, when people laugh and he's in the room, he thinks they're laughing at him, Yeah. And I think that you elect leaders with a sense of irony who can understand that levity is best and a powerful tool when you use it to self-deprecate and to show people that you're like them. When you see leaders that are able to do that, and Obama was probably the best in my lifetime.
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of what's missing. And it sounds like, something you do at 2 a.m. in your dorm room when I'm talking about this with a bong, but I really do believe it is a real integral part of teaching people how to lead is how to be part of them and understanding those things. Be honest, get to the point, understand exactly what it is you have to say, and explain to people, the unintended consequences of their actions so they can think it through more. And then, of course, whenever you can self-deprecate and show other people who are looking up to you that you're the same, ironically, again, your strength increases. There's so much of this here that we don't talk about, and nuance is dead. I mean, at least
But I think you touched on something I think so critical, and I think it's one of the reasons that we Democrats and we liberals are where we are, is we've abandoned humor. We have so poisoned our own side that nobody wants to live in our world anymore. The outrage, the purity tests, the cancel culture, the finger wagging, it is such a suffocating minefield that we on the left now live in, that we've alienated people. And I actually saw this when you talk about dorm rooms, when my very first year in college, 1990, was the birth of political correctness. And I suddenly saw my side. We used to be the fun side. We used to be the side that wagged our fingers at these Reagan, religious right guys.
Young Republicans, yeah.
Yeah, the Republicans, they used to be the side that wanted to, cancel movies and put labels on records and say that rap should never be, sold anywhere. That was their side. We were the side of free speech and openness and laughter. Laughter is so important for the human soul. You've got to be able to laugh, right? It's the only way that you can get through this raging storm that is life. And we've declared war on it. Comedians won't go to college campuses anymore. Kids are afraid to speak up in colleges now. College is now a place where kids can't speak their mind because they're afraid of being canceled online. And we've got to get back to that. We've got to get to a place where we can make jokes. And yes, sometimes you cross a line and sometimes you offend people. But if you don't have that freedom to experiment, and if you don't have that open oxygen of people laughing at the things that would otherwise make them cry, then all we will do is cry and all we will do is shut down. And until we as liberals and Democrats, because we say things like, well, we've got to reclaim the flag, we've got to reclaim the Bible, we've got to reclaim, patriotism, we got to reclaim the laughter. We have to make the Democratic movement, the Democratic Party, a fun place to be, or we're going to be living in the wilderness forever.
It's funny because it's when we say comedy and we say humor, I think that it doesn't really resonate all the time with people what we're talking about, and I know that like we all see this, like for the people, and when I meet Russians, and I grew up near the Russian embassy in DC.
Oh, yeah.
And I play basketball with these guys, and I guarantee you some of the guys were not GRU but KGB, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure some of the guys playing with them were FBI, but we would play on Thursday night. And so I get to know. And then when I would go to the beach, these young kids would come from Russia to Ocean City, Maryland, where I used to go, and you talk to them, and it's funny too, because there are some jokes, as when I first started doing comedy, I once did a show for some Eastern Europeans that spoke English really well. And I was really worried. Right. But I learned this. And when I found it when I went to Canada too, make fun of yourself as an American, not your credibility, but just
right.
the things that make us annoying, which is not at your credibility. We're all annoying. Okay. And I say this, and I know it sounds superficial, but I really believe it has legs, that one of the ways we stop this aggression is to put into people's minds, the aggressors, especially, that the people they're killing are just like the people they love. And that sounds, I know, like some kind of Hallmark film, but I really believe it's important. And I do believe it's something that can, thwart a lot of these crises and nip them in the bud. I really believe it.
No, I look, I agree with you. I think that I think one of the problems, certainly on our side, is that we have been dicing people up, certainly for a couple of decades. This identity politics, this notion that, well, you're from a different tribe, therefore you can't understand me. There's an attack on what I do as a writer. There's been a huge attack, ironically, of all places, coming from the left, about you can't write about any characters unless you're from that exact micro tribe of that character, which to me is suicidal, because the point of the artist is for you to take a walk in someone else's shoes, right? You watch a movie and suddenly you are in their skin and you're feeling their feelings, because maybe they don't come from the same background as you, but maybe they've had similar experience, or maybe they've just had similar feelings.
Yeah.
I grew up watching Star Trek, and I've never been a Klingon, but when I surf on the Next Generation, who's a Klingon on a starship with humans, and he's an outsider, I know how that feels to be an outsider.
Yeah.
And for our side to take that away, for our side to cancel writers, musicians, artists, because you are not from the exact DNA stripe as the person you're writing about, I think is horrendous. And it
Well,
has.
your wife's a playwright. Am I mistaken? No,
My
is
wife
she
is a playwright. Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I tell people this in storytelling, and from some of the stuff I consult, like lawyers and speakers, is just this idea that look, your protagonist shouldn't be perfect, and your antagonist shouldn't be all evil,
Yeah.
because there's a little bit of that in everybody, and that really resonates with people. And I think when we explain that, like it's hard for us, it's hard for me, like when Bill Maher went to see Trump, I was really disappointed, right? But I'll let it play. Right. I
Right.
mean, I can't hate him because he does that. Right. And I know Mar for 40 years. Right. He's like the same guy we met when we were
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah.
And I look at, I look at Trump and I look at the family, and I ask myself, are these true? These aren't, first of all, you're not an evil person. You're a person. Evil is something that is an ethereal thing. Right. I mean, I'm going off on a tangent here. I guess to bring it back to this though, and and one of the reasons why I thought you'd be such a good person to talk about this is because, I mean, you have a unique history. Your parents are, Hollywood icons, but more than that, they were contributors to this great conversation about, art and humanity, and you write about things that are really different, with a point of view. No, I think it's remarkable. And I'd love to do a whole conversation with you sometime just to hear what influenced you and how you became this type of writer. But I mean, looking forward and moving forward, do you think what's happening right now is going to cast a level of cynicism in the young people? I tell people that, I'm going to quote myself here, but I said I used to be, I used to think a cynic was a skeptic with all the facts, but I think an optimist is a cynic with children. And I have kids, so I have to be optimistic. I have, and so I wonder, again, with irony, is there any way that what we're going through right now, Nietzsche-esque wise, makes us stronger?
I think that I have a lot of hope in Gen Z, because Gen
Which
Z
one is that? Because I always screw this up.
Gen Z are the young kids, like my son, he's 20 years old, like his generation.
Okay.
Because they're the ones growing up with all the consequences. And I like to compare it because when we talk about the baby boomers, there's kind of two, right? There's the baby boomers who grew up in the 50s and the ones who grew up in the 70s. And the 50s was when everything was starting, right? It was plastic. Oh my God, it's amazing. You can drop a plate, it'll bounce. Plastic, and this notion of everything was refrigerated, and oh my God, and television, you could sit there and watch a box. Everything was new and exciting, better life through science. And then the 70s came around, and those kids were like, oh, there's pollution, and we're ruining our planet, and
there's plastic in your gut, and there's an island of it in the Pacific.
So I think that they're the consequence generation in the 70s. I think it's the difference between the millennials who sort of grew up in the 90s, when it was like, oh my God, the internet, it's amazing. And globalization, factories are in different countries and we're all working together. Yay. Now this new generation is growing up and they're like, oh, globalization meant that what should have been my job is now being done by a child in a hot country.
Yeah.
And the internet means that my fellow college students are basically cosplaying as terrorists and marching for the exact people who would kill them. Yeah. So I think they understand these things. They understand things like getting shot in school is a real thing because they grew up with drop drills. It's like when we talk about how Biden was of the generation that really pushed for nuclear regulation, right? Nuclear treaties, because he grew up hiding under his desk. These kids grew up hiding under their desk too, but from school shooters. So I think this generation is going to grow up with a much better understanding of how to deal with all these new threats. I mean, I think one of the reasons that the internet went crazy is because Grandma and Grandpa Congress had no idea what it was. And they said, oh, the internet's a series of tubes. Remember Senator Ted Stevens said that. They don't know. I'm hopeful that younger people who really understand how these threats work will then craft the kind of legislation that will help their children be safe from it.
Well, to end this with a Mark Twain quote, I think that was actually used in The Big Short, which he says, "It's not what you don't know that'll hurt you, what you know for sure that just ain't so."
Yeah. No.
And and moving forward. Before I go, can I pub anything for you? What are you up to these days? What are you doing?
Well, I'm working on a new book right now. Good Lord, it's going to be about a year. But yeah, I mean, Tiger Chair is out and it's going, and it is the story of what would happen if World War III took place and the Chinese People's Liberation Army was occupying Los Angeles. So it's a letter. It's a whole letter of a Chinese soldier writing back home to his best friend saying,
with second thoughts, without getting in the way.
Yeah, we thought this was going to be a quick war. We're stuck in a forever war. And let me tell you why we're stuck in a forever war on the streets of America.
Yeah, I saw Red Dawn the other day. I was flipping through cable.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. Hey, Max, thank you so much, my friend. Please take care of your family and yourself, and look forward to talking again real soon, okay?
Thank you, Chip.
All right, buddy. Again, that is Max Brooks. Just an amazing guy. If you get an opportunity, read or listen to, you can actually download the audio easier for Tiger Chair. But World War Z is an amazing read as well, and a great film too. All right, so coming up this week, we're going to be covering, obviously, some of the big stories at Really American. One I'm working on right now is, I mentioned this Qatari jet, this $400 million jet that was supposedly be given to us by the idea that the actual government of Qatar wanted to give it. It turns out we were actually, through back channels, trying to get them to give it to us. For what in return, we don't know. Just one of the many stories we have coming up. Again, for the Really American podcast, thanks to Max Brooks, I'm Chip Franklin. We'll see you next time.